The growing threat of terrorism is appearing at the top of the agenda of the UK government as the intelligence agencies and armed forces come out as winners in the spending review. It comes just over a month since the brutal machete murder of a British soldier in London, which the killer said was revenge for the UK's military campaigns. And as RT's Polly Boyko has been finding out, there are mounting doubts over whether the war on terror is actually making the British safe.
They're accused of hacking a soldier to death on the streets of London and are now preparing to stand trial.
Tell them to bring our troops back so you can all live in peace. Leave our lands and you will live in peace. That's all I have to say.
The chilling message, an indication of what drove the attack. But the politicians say it's nonsense.
It is completely wrong to blame this killing on the religion of Islam. But it is also equally wrong to try to draw any link between this murder and British foreign policy or the actions of British forces who are risking their lives abroad for the sake of freedom.
But there are those who took part in those military campaigns firsthand who disagree. Joe says he was disillusioned by the reality of what fighting for freedom in the name of Britain's safety involved.
Compared to some of the excesses in Afghanistan and Iraq, Woolwich is tame, which is a very serious kind of charge to lay, but it's absolutely true. And we're very lucky that there have only been so few attacks like this. One of the banners we went to Afghanistan under was peacekeeping, and in our peacekeeping operation we ran out of high explosive artillery ammunition.
That gulf between how the war is presented and the bleak reality is all too evident for many in Britain's vast Muslim community.
We are in contact with our friends and family back home, and we know what exactly is going on over there. While we see some of the media reports from the UK or the UK politicians, their speeches in Parliament, it's not reflecting the realities of Afghanistan war.
And yet there's been almost no public or political discussion about the Western wars that drove the attack in Woolwich.
It's because they obviously want to prosecute the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and the project, and you have a look at it as a project in the Middle East, is very long-standing. It predates 9/11, and there are public policy documents which say that. And so obviously because they want to keep doing these things, there are plans for Syria. Iran is on the horizon as well. They need to keep throwing up this kind of ideological barrier and continue to attempt to de-link the killings like this from the real world.
Our mission in Afghanistan does remain vital to our national security. We're there to prevent that country from being a safe haven to al-Qaeda, from where they might plan attacks on the UK or our allies.
I think you'd have to be particularly stupid as a Prime Minister not to realise if you invade other people's countries, you're likely to get a boat back.
The list of terror plots foiled by MI5 on UK soil makes for frightening reading. Since the Woolwich attack, the number of people who believe that a clash of the civilizations between white Britons and Muslims is inevitable has gone up to almost 2/3 of the population. Far-right movements such as the English Defence League have been using the incidents to fan the flames of Islamophobia in the UK, creating tensions that make it harder for ordinary British Muslims to speak out about UK foreign policy.
Many Muslims are afraid of, on the taboo of calling them extremists or terrorists, but if you speak to most of them, they are sympathetic to the message of the attacker, but not to his actions, because they are against any kind of terrorism, any kind of terrorist violence, be it here or be it in any other country, including Afghanistan, Iraq, or anywhere else.
The war on terror has always been sold as keeping Britain safe. But to those who object to the UK's involvement overseas, the savage attack in Woolwich merely serves as an example that it may be doing the exact opposite. Polly Boyko, RT, London.
Well, the UK intelligence agencies will be getting £100 million a year from 2015. The Chancellor, George Osborne, says this is because they are on the front line and need a boost to their resources. Well, let's talk more about this with British MP George Galloway for the Respect Party, joining me live now from London. George, security surely a priority, so they deserve this money, don't they?
Well, they'll probably need every penny of it and more, because Britain is in very real, clear and present danger from terrorism, both from within and from without. But only a fool or a knave would seek to separate British foreign policy from that danger of terrorism. And the Mayor of London, I'm afraid, is a fool, and the Prime Minister is a knave. Only an idiot could imagine that, as Ken Livingstone just pointed out in that report, that if you go around the world invading and occupying other people's countries, that you're not going to generate a real danger to yourself, blowback, as Ken called it. But we've gone one step further now. In Syria, as before in Libya, we're actually giving guns and money to the very terrorist extremists who are attacking us on the streets of our own capital city. It must be a policy which virtually qualifies as insanity, and an insane policy at home is not going to keep people safe.
So British foreign policy is responsible for that attack that we saw in Woolwich. Many would say it's surprising that there haven't been more attacks like that, though.
Well, that's right, and I think the intelligence services have probably thwarted several. But you don't have to take my word for it. You have the video of the murderers in Woolwich themselves telling us why they were doing it. We had the martyrdom videos of the maniacs who blew themselves up and hundreds of others on 7/7/2005 in London on the Underground and on a London bus. And they too told us why they were doing it. I see no reason to doubt them.
And yet David Cameron will say what happens in Afghanistan is so vital to our national security, to the people like you walking the streets in London and the UK.
But it's having the opposite effect. It's making us in a more imperiled. Our situation is more dangerous. The more we attack and invade other people, the more we arm and finance extreme Takfiri fanatics who beheaded a Christian bishop. If people can hear me, beheaded a Christian bishop just yesterday and videoed it in front of women and children watching it and put it up on the internet whilst chanting the name of God. They're paid for by us, by the same David Cameron who tells us we need £100 million to go to the security services to protect us from the very people he's employing as agents in the struggle in Syria.
And can I quickly ask you, how is all of this now impacting on the divisions we're seeing in society there in the UK? How worried are you about the anti-Muslim sentiment that appears to be now building there in the UK? Something I know that you're quite an expert on.
Well, I'm worried about it, but we shouldn't overestimate it. There have been isolated attacks which have largely been pathetically insubstantial upon mosques and Muslim institutions of various kinds. There have been fatalities in individual attacks on Muslims. But the vast majority of the British people are not like that. This is not a country where fascism has any traction. After all, together with Russia, we defeated fascism in the living memory of some people still alive today. So people in jackboots and giving Hitler salutes and wearing swastikas like the people who are doing these things are never going to find much traction in Britain. No, most British people, according to the opinion polls, blame the government. Only 11% of the British people in the last opinion poll support David Cameron's policy of arming and financing these fanatics in Syria. And even in the Iraq War, before we knew it was built upon a tower of lies, the majority of British people were against it. The problem is in the building behind me, where the boys in the bubble follow the leader, whatever he has to say. Although even inside that bubble, the beheading of a Christian bishop may prove a turning point, just like the eating of a heart on video, on YouTube, by the same kind of people a month or two ago, decisively began a swing in British public opinion away from these fanatics.
George Galloway, thanks so much for your point of view on all of this. Great to talk to you there live in London. George Galloway, UK Member of Parliament.